The stars hung cold and distant above, casting a pale, indifferent light over the barren desert landscape. The planet was nothing but jagged rocks, dry sands, and blackened craters that bore the scars of countless battles. The wind carried grains of ash that stung the skin and whispered through the hollows of the canyons, as if the planet itself were warning anyone who dared to stand against what was coming. Kale stood alone on a rocky outcrop, his pulse steady, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The shadow that had crept across the sky announced the arrival of the alien Empress herself. Her fleet stretched across the horizon like a living nightmare. Thousands of sleek warships, some bigger than mountains, hovered over the desert. Tens of thousands of alien soldiers streamed out of the ships, their armor glinting in the starlight. Their weapons pulsed with energy, crackling with lethal potential. And at their center, the Empress, towering in her golden armor and radiating power, surveyed the landscape. Kale's heart beat with determination, not fear. Every human on this planet had already fallen or fled, leaving him as the last defender. Some might have called it madness. Kale called it duty. He had been trained for this moment, not to survive comfortably, but to stand against impossibility and show what a single human could do. The first wave of the Zythurian army descended. Their ships sliced through the thin atmosphere, engines screaming like banshees. Beams of plasma energy cut through the sky, incinerating anything they touched. Rocks vaporized, desert sand boiled and hissed. Kale dropped behind a jagged ridge, feeling the heat of a nearby blast scorch the back of his armor. He gritted his teeth, adjusting the pulse rifle he had salvaged from an abandoned military outpost. One man against an entire army, he muttered to himself. The absurdity of it almost made him laugh. Humans had never been creatures to back down from impossible odds. He had no fleet, no reinforcements, not even a team. He had only himself and the tools of survival that his mind and hands had scavenged, repaired, or improvised. That had to be enough. Kale waited for the first hovering fighter to come within range. He had spent hours studying their patterns, their flight paths, the rhythm of their attacks. He timed his shot, held his breath, and fired. The pulse beam hit its target dead on. The fighter spiraled uncontrollably and crashed into the desert with a tremendous explosion. The blast threw sand and fragments into the air, and Kale allowed himself a brief, grim smile. One down, thousands to go. High above, the Empress watched. Her golden eyes glimmered with curiosity, almost as if she had never expected to see this. She had heard tales of human resilience, of their stubborn refusal to bow, but this lone human defying an entire army, was different. Her generals shifted uneasily behind her, sensing the disturbance in the flow of the battle. They had never been stopped by so few. And yet here was Kale, a single human, shaping the battlefield with ingenuity and relentless courage. Kale did not notice the Empress's gaze. He was too focused on survival and on maximizing every small advantage. He began to lure enemy soldiers into narrow canyons and crevices where their numbers counted for nothing. Traps detonated in precise sequences, flipping their vehicles, cutting down squads of soldiers, and leaving the rest uncertain and fearful. For every fallen fighter, Kale scavenged weapons, ammunition, and energy cells. Every kill became a resource, every victory a stepping stone. The alien army adapted quickly. They spread out, tried flanking maneuvers, and attempted coordinated strikes to isolate him. Kale anticipated most of these moves. He used natural choke points and his intimate knowledge of the terrain to funnel them into ambushes. When he had exhausted one location, he moved to another, leaving traps and distractions in his wake. Fires raged across the desert, creating smoke screens that masked his movements. By nightfall, several of the Empress's elite units had been destroyed or trapped, and her curiosity had shifted into quiet concern. Kale's body was covered in cuts, bruises, and burns. Sweat poured down his face, mixing with dirt and sand. His armor, patched together from scavenged parts, was dented and scorched, yet he moved with unbroken resolve. Every human instinct screamed at him to survive, but deeper than that was something else. The need to prove that humanity, though scattered and outmatched, could not be broken. He paused briefly, scanning the horizon. Through the haze of fire and smoke, he spotted the Empress's personal ship hovering above the battlefield. Its presence was commanding, almost suffocating, but Kale did not flinch. He raised his pulse rifle and fired a series of calculated shots, targeting the smaller fighters escorting her vessel. One after another, the escorts fell from the sky, exploding into fragments of metal and fire. The Empress's lips curved into a thin line. She had not expected a single human to reach her attention, let alone inflict damage on her forces. She leaned forward in her throne, the energy field of her ship shimmering around her, and whispered to herself, "Interesting. This human is unlike any I have ever encountered." Kale felt no time for hesitation. He ducked behind a shattered column of rock as the aliens regrouped. Their new formation was tighter, more cautious. They knew now that underestimating him was deadly. The human fought not just with weapons, but with strategy. He forced them into false retreats, tricked them into ambushes, and used their own overconfidence against them. The battlefield became a chessboard, and Kale moved with the precision of a master player. Each kill another calculated strike in a war that should have been lost before it even began. The sun began to set, painting the desert in streaks of blood red and gold. Fires from destroyed ships and vehicles lit the landscape with flickering, infernal light. Kale's figure stood tall against this chaos, a solitary silhouette in the inferno. His pulse rifle hummed, his grenades were ready, and his mind raced through contingencies for every possible move the enemy might make next. He was exhausted, but exhaustion was a luxury he could not afford. He could die at any moment, and yet, as long as he stood, he was proof that humans could endure beyond reason. The Empress spoke to her generals through a network of mental projection, her voice cold but tinged with fascination. "Prepare yourselves," she said. "This human is not merely surviving, he is performing feats I did not believe possible. Watch closely." Her army hesitated now, unsure, caught between awe and fear. Kale's ingenuity and daring had shaken them. They had expected compliance or surrender. They had not expected mastery over the battlefield by a single human. Kale moved through the ruins of alien vehicles, scavenging plasma grenades and energy cells, adapting his makeshift arsenal as he advanced. Each step was measured, each shot precise. Every trap laid hours before had claimed more enemies than he could count, and yet he was still standing. He ducked behind a ridge as a squadron of flying war machines swooped down. Timing his jumps and rolls perfectly, he fired his makeshift explosives, sending the machines tumbling into the desert floor, mangled beyond repair. Hours passed, though time felt warped under the endless tension of battle. Kale's stamina was taxed beyond human limits, yet adrenaline and the instinct to fight drove him forward. The Empress's army was now cautious. Their earlier confidence was shaken. Every commander knew that humans were stubborn, but this single human was redefining stubbornness. By nightfall, the battlefield was a smoldering wasteland of twisted metal, fire, and debris. Kale's clothes were shredded, his armor battered and blackened. His pulse rifle was half destroyed, his grenades few, and his body screamed for rest. Yet he stood upright, breathing heavily but unbroken. Above, the Empress's golden eyes never left him. She had never witnessed such defiance, such raw ingenuity from a single being. And in that moment, she realized something terrifying. Kale was not fighting for survival alone. He was fighting for the idea of humanity itself. Kale lifted his gaze to the night sky, the stars now glittering like icy diamonds. Somewhere above, the Empress whispered to her generals, "Prepare to witness something unexpected." The words hung in the air, charged with power and anticipation. Kale, unaware of her exact attention, readied a makeshift grenade launcher, scanning the horizon. The alien army had paused, wary of advancing further. They could not predict his next move. The impossible had begun, and Kale was ready for the storm they would bring next. As he crouched behind a ruined alien vehicle, listening to the distant hum of engines and the crackle of fires, Kale allowed himself a moment to feel something rare and powerful. Hope. Not hope for himself, but hope for humanity, hope for every underdog, every human who had been written off and counted out. He was a single person against an empire, yet he carried the weight of a species. And in the silence between explosions, Kale knew one truth that no alien, no army, and no empress could ever deny. Humans were not just survivors. Humans were warriors. The first night of battle ended, but it was far from over. Kale's journey had only begun, and the eyes of the universe were watching. The desert night was alive with the crackle of fire and the distant hum of alien engines. Kale crouched behind a wrecked hover tank, breathing heavily but keeping his mind razor-sharp. The first wave of the Empress's army had been slowed, but he knew it was only temporary. They would regroup. They would advance. And when they did, the human spirit would be tested again. Kale moved silently through the shadows, using the chaos to his advantage. Every crater, every shattered vehicle, every twist of rock was a potential weapon. He scavenged energy cells from destroyed drones, rigged plasma grenades on uneven terrain, and set traps that required little effort but promised maximum impact. Each trap was a message. Humans fight smarter, not just harder. The Zythurians might have numbers and technology, but Kale had cunning and instinct. Above, the Empress hovered in her golden command ship, her attention unwavering. She had sent elite squads to investigate, but every attempt to isolate him failed. Each time her forces fell into traps or were destroyed by his cunning, she leaned closer, studying him. The silence between her words and her general's reports was heavy with fascination. Humans, she had learned, were unpredictable, unrelenting, and terrifying in their ingenuity. And Kale embodied all of it. Her telepathic link crackled. "Prepare the vanguard," she commanded. "If this human survives what I send next, it will be a moment remembered across the galaxy." Kale didn't know what the Empress was planning, but he felt the tension in the air shift. The ground trembled faintly, a deep vibration that set the sand to rolling in small dunes. Out of the night, massive silhouettes emerged, towering Zythurian war machines, bristling with weapons far larger than anything Kale had encountered. Their steps shook the desert, sending debris flying in every direction. Kale smiled grimly. He had expected escalation. He had trained for it in simulations that felt less dangerous than this reality. He raised his pulse rifle, but he knew a direct fight would be suicidal. Instead, he set to work with what he had: speed, strategy, and terrain. He sprinted toward a narrow canyon, luring the war machines into confined spaces where their size would be a disadvantage. His first trap detonated as he calculated, triggering a series of small charges that toppled one of the giant machines onto its side. Sparks and fire erupted, and Kale rolled to avoid debris. A small group of alien soldiers tried to flank him, but he had anticipated this. Quick maneuvers, well-placed plasma shots, and a collapsing rock formation sent them tumbling into a crater. The destruction was precise, controlled, and calculated. The Empress's eyes narrowed as she observed from above. Most humans would have been crushed under such overwhelming odds, but not this one. Kale's determination, his adaptability, and his ability to anticipate and outthink her forces were extraordinary. She leaned closer to the viewing screens of her generals. "Bring forward the Sentinel," she ordered. "It is time the human sees the full reach of my power." Kale did not see it arrive at first. A deep shadow fell over the desert, accompanied by a hum that resonated through the ground. A massive, bioengineered Zythurian creature emerged, taller than the largest war machines, armored in chitin plates that gleamed with a sinister light. Its limbs were tipped with energy blades, and its eyes glowed with intelligence as it scanned the battlefield. Kale froze for a heartbeat, not out of fear, but in recognition of the magnitude of what he faced. The Sentinel was a living weapon, designed to crush resistance and instill terror. Its appearance should have broken any normal opponent. Yet Kale's mind raced, searching for patterns, weaknesses, and openings. He had fought machines before, but this was different. The Sentinel advanced with terrifying precision, clearing obstacles effortlessly. Each step left scorch marks in the sand, and the alien soldiers around it followed its path, emboldened by its presence. Kale ducked behind a jagged rock, firing his pulse rifle at its legs. The shots sparked off its armor but left it unharmed. He cursed under his breath, realizing that conventional attacks would not suffice. Kale pivoted. He needed to think differently. He could not rely solely on weapons. He needed to outsmart it, use the environment, and force it into making a mistake. The desert offered him one advantage: unpredictability. He sprinted toward a canyon filled with unstable rock formations, luring the Sentinel and its guards. They followed, their confidence evident in their coordinated movements. Kale ducked into a narrow passageway and detonated carefully placed charges. Rocks cascaded down, crashing into the Sentinel and pinning it temporarily against the canyon wall. The creature roared, a sound that shook Kale to his bones, but he did not falter. He seized the moment to strike with a makeshift plasma launcher, aiming for the joints in its chitin armor. Sparks and smoke erupted. The Sentinel stumbled, slowed by damage but far from destroyed. Kale's heart raced, not with fear but with exhilaration. The Empress watched, her golden eyes gleaming with interest. The human was remarkable, far beyond anything she had expected. Each tactical maneuver, each improvisation, each bold attack showcased a level of intelligence, courage, and adaptability that few in the galaxy could match. She whispered to her generals, "He is not just fighting for survival, he fights for the idea of humanity itself." Kale, unaware of the Empress's words, continued his assault. He fought through exhaustion, pain, and the constant threat of annihilation. Alien soldiers approached from every angle, yet he adapted, used misdirection, and exploited weaknesses that even seasoned warriors would overlook. Each victory, each narrowly avoided attack, reinforced his belief that humans were not defined by size or firepower, but by ingenuity and determination. Hours passed. The desert was a chaotic storm of explosions, smoke, and fire. Kale moved like a shadow, a ghost of human defiance among monsters and machines. He rigged collapsing cliffs, set timed explosives, and used his knowledge of physics and strategy to compensate for his lack of numbers. Every action was calculated, every step deliberate. He was no longer just a fighter, he was a force of nature. The sentinel, freed from the canyon's trap, roared again and charged directly at Kale. With only seconds to react, Kale leapt into a narrow crevice, narrowly avoiding the creature's massive energy blades. Sparks flew as the sentinel's strike shattered rock around him. Kale rolled to safety, then fired a series of plasma grenades into its exposed joints. The creature staggered but did not fall. Kale knew he could not rely solely on force. He needed strategy. He retreated toward a narrow valley where alien reinforcements would be forced into predictable paths. He set traps in a sequence designed to maximize confusion and damage. The first squad ran into one trap, triggering a chain reaction that collapsed part of the valley wall. The second squad, seeing the chaos, attempted to retreat but ran into hidden mines. Explosions rocked the ground, scattering debris across the battlefield. The Empress's voice cut through the mental link to her generals. "Stop underestimating him," she warned. "Every move, every feint, every trap is deliberate. He is teaching us that humans are more than flesh and bone, they are ideas made flesh." Kale paused briefly, scanning the battlefield. Fires burned like miniature suns, and the ground trembled beneath the weight of the sentinel and war machines. Exhaustion clawed at him, but he refused to stop. He adjusted his weapons, recalculated his traps, and prepared for the next wave. Every step, every shot, every decision was proof that a single human could alter the course of an entire battle. As the night deepened, Kale moved to higher ground. From this vantage point, he could see the full scale of the enemy's hesitation. The Zythurians, accustomed to overwhelming victory, were now cautious, hesitant to advance further. Kale allowed himself a brief, grim smile. He was a single human against an entire army, yet he had shifted the balance. The Empress, watching from her throne ship, leaned forward. Her golden eyes glimmered with a mix of curiosity and respect. She had not expected a human to endure this long, to manipulate the battlefield with such intelligence and cunning. She spoke to her generals. "Prepare the flagship. I will descend." "It is time the human sees the full scope of my power." Kale did not see the flagship arrive until it was too late to retreat. Its presence blotted out stars, casting a massive shadow over the desert. The Empress herself stood at the edge of the ship, radiating authority, power, and a lethal calm. Kale's pulse quickened, not from fear but anticipation. This was no longer just survival. This was a confrontation of wills, a clash between human ingenuity and alien supremacy. The battlefield fell silent, except for the crackle of fires and the hum of energy weapons. Kale's eyes met hers, and in that instant an understanding passed between them. He was not just a fighter. He was a symbol, and she was about to witness the full force of human defiance. Kale loaded his remaining grenades, recalibrated his pulse rifle, and took a deep breath. The night was far from over, and the next move would decide whether one human could stand against an empire and leave the galaxy stunned. Kale crouched on the ridge, the vast desert stretching before him, illuminated by the fires of wrecked ships and molten craters. His pulse raced, not with fear but with focus. He had fought thousands of alien soldiers and towering war machines, survived traps, ambushes, and near-death attacks, and yet now a presence more formidable than anything else commanded the battlefield. The Empress herself had descended. Her flagship, massive and gleaming, hovered just above the desert floor. Energy shields flickered across its surface, protecting her from everything but the ingenuity of a human mind. Her armor reflected the firelight, golden and radiant, her eyes like molten stars scanning the battlefield with a predator's precision. She stepped from the edge of her ship, her silhouette impossibly tall, radiating power. Around her, the Zythurian army paused, unsure, their confidence shaken by Kale's relentless assault. Kale tightened his grip on his pulse rifle and surveyed the terrain. The Empress's approach was deliberate, calculated. She did not merely attack. She analyzed, adapted, and commanded with an intellect that rivaled the deadliest war machines he had faced. But Kale had something they did not: unpredictability, human ingenuity, and a refusal to yield. He moved swiftly, taking cover behind a cluster of jagged rocks. His mind raced, calculating angles, trajectories, and weak points. The Empress was powerful, but she was not invincible. Every human battle tactic he had studied, every simulation he had run, led him to one conclusion: she could be outsmarted. The ground trembled as her steps sent shockwaves through the desert. Kale's pulse rifle hummed in his hands, though he knew conventional fire would not stop her. His strategy shifted. He would not meet her strength directly. He would use speed, precision, and terrain to make the impossible possible. She raised her hand, and the air vibrated with energy. Plasmas and lasers arced toward him, scorching the rocks he had hidden behind. Kale rolled, narrowly avoiding the blast, and fired a pulse grenade at a rock formation to his side. The explosion sent debris tumbling toward the advancing soldiers, temporarily blocking their path and forcing them to regroup. Above him, the Empress's golden eyes narrowed. She had faced resistance before, but never with this level of strategy, daring, and raw human will. Every maneuver Kale made was deliberate, every distraction calculated. She tilted her head slightly, intrigued. Kale knew he could not simply survive. He needed to demonstrate dominance in a way that no army could ignore. He sprinted toward a narrow canyon, the rocks providing cover and strategic advantage. The Empress followed, her steps crushing sand and stone beneath her. Alien soldiers attempted to flank him, but he had anticipated their movements. Small charges detonated, collapsing sections of rock, sending enemy units tumbling into makeshift pits. The Empress reached the canyon's edge, her presence overwhelming. She raised her arm, energy arcing between her fingers, ready to strike. Kale's pulse quickened. He had one chance. He fired a series of plasma grenades into the canyon walls, causing a controlled collapse that forced the Empress to leap back. Sparks and dust filled the air, and Kale ducked behind cover. For a heartbeat, they were silent, facing each other across a battlefield littered with fire and debris. Kale's chest heaved with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with defiance. The Empress's gaze softened slightly, not with mercy, but with respect. She had expected fear, surrender, or hesitation. Instead, she saw focus, resilience, and intellect. Kale spoke aloud, though she could likely hear him through the telepathic hum of the battlefield. "You underestimate humans if you think one of us can be controlled or broken." The Empress's eyes glittered. "I do not underestimate you, I study you. That is why I am here," she replied, her voice resonating like a bell of authority. Her hand dropped, and the sentinel, the bioengineered weapon that had terrified him before, advanced again. Kale's mind raced. He could not defeat it head-on, and the Empress herself was formidable. He needed a plan that relied not on strength, but on calculation, surprise, and the terrain itself. He led the sentinel and a group of soldiers through narrow ravines and unstable cliffs, each step carefully orchestrated. Explosions, rockfalls, and misdirections bought him precious time and inflicted damage on the alien forces. Hours passed in a blur of motion, strategy, and survival. Kale moved like a shadow across the battlefield, striking where the enemy least expected. He improvised weapons, repaired pulse rifles, and set traps with meticulous precision. The Empress observed each move, analyzing patterns, predicting possibilities, and yet unable to anticipate every human instinct. Finally, the battlefield opened into a vast crater, the perfect stage. Kale stood at its center, exhausted but unbowed. Fires burned around him, lighting the sand in fiery reds and oranges. The Empress descended from her ship, floating gracefully to the center. The sentinel knelt at her side, a reminder of the army's might. She looked at him, golden eyes piercing through the haze of fire and smoke. "You have fought well, human, far beyond expectation," she said, "but this is where your luck ends." Kale raised his pulse rifle, scanning for any advantage. He did not answer. Words were unnecessary. Actions would speak louder than anything. The Empress moved first. She unleashed a wave of energy that cut through the air toward him. Kale rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the blast. The force shattered rock and sand, sending debris flying. He fired back, but his shots glanced off her armor. Conventional attacks would not work. He needed creativity. He darted toward the edge of the crater, using the uneven terrain to his advantage. The sentinel lunged, energy blades slashing. Kale jumped, narrowly avoiding the strike, and rolled into a hidden fissure in the crater's side. From this position, he triggered a series of explosives he had placed hours before, sending boulders crashing down toward the sentinel and the Empress. The explosion shook the ground, forcing the sentinel back. Kale seized the moment to fire a precise shot at the creature's joints. Sparks and smoke erupted. The sentinel faltered, stunned. Kale rolled from his cover, sprinting toward the Empress herself. She raised her hands, energy flaring around her, but Kale's movement was too quick, too unpredictable. Using a combination of grenades, debris, and momentum, he closed the distance between them in moments. The Empress braced, expecting a direct attack, but Kale sidestepped at the last second, using her own momentum against her. She stumbled slightly, a rare vulnerability that few had ever seen. Kale didn't strike immediately. He assessed, recalculated, and feinted, forcing her to react. Each move was a message. Humans adapt, humans learn, humans improvise under pressure. The Empress's golden eyes widened slightly, not with fear, but with recognition. "You are remarkable," she admitted, her voice cutting through the hum of the battlefield. "Few could face me and survive this long, but even you cannot change the outcome." Kale smiled grimly. "Maybe not today, but every human alive proves otherwise every day. We don't just survive, we endure, we fight, and we adapt. That is our power." The Empress paused, studying him. For a brief moment, the battlefield seemed suspended in time. Then, with a wave of her hand, the sentinel rose, energy pulsing through its massive form. The army advanced again, but with caution. Even they hesitated, sensing the unusual nature of this human's defense. Kale had shifted the perception of the entire Zythurian force. Kale took a deep breath, scanning the battlefield for every possible advantage. He realized that to win, he did not need to destroy the Empress outright. He needed to survive, confuse, and demonstrate the power of human ingenuity. His traps, tactics, and relentless courage had already left her army shaken. If he could survive this encounter, he would prove that humans were more than flesh and bone. They were ideas made real. The night deepened. Fires burned across the desert, lighting the Empress and her army in a flickering glow. Kale crouched behind a pile of wreckage, pulse rifle ready, grenades primed. The Empress hovered above, her gaze fixed on him. Every commander in her army watched, stunned, uncertain. This was not the defeat they had expected. Kale felt exhaustion gnawing at him, but it was drowned out by exhilaration. He was not just fighting for himself. He fought for humanity, the idea that even one individual could alter the outcome of a battle, even an entire war. He moved like a shadow through the battlefield, striking precisely, retreating strategically, and constantly outthinking his enemies. The Empress's voice carried across the battlefield. "Witness, all of you. Witness what a single human can do." Her army froze, stunned not by brute force alone, but by the cunning, intelligence, and unyielding spirit displayed before them. Kale's pulse raced. He prepared his final set of traps, his last grenades, and his remaining ammunition. The night was far from over, but one truth had become undeniable. Humans could not be underestimated. One person, one mind, one will could defy an empire. And he had done so in full view of the galaxy's most powerful ruler. The stage was set for the final confrontation. Kale would face the Empress directly, not as a lone soldier against a monster, but as a human representing the indomitable will of his species. He adjusted his stance, ready for whatever she would throw at him next. And somewhere above, the Empress's golden eyes reflected fire and admiration. She had seen the impossible made real. The human before her was not just surviving, he was challenging the very idea of her power. The desert was silent now, save for the crackle of fires and the distant hum of alien energy weapons. Kale stood alone on the ridgeline, battered, exhausted, and yet unbroken. His pulse rifle was scorched and dented, his grenades nearly spent, and his armor battered beyond recognition. Every muscle in his body screamed for rest, but he did not falter. The Empress's flagship hovered just above the sands, casting a massive shadow that swallowed everything beneath it. She had descended fully this time, stepping off the edge of the ship with a grace that seemed impossible for a being of her size and power. Her golden eyes gleamed as she surveyed the battlefield and then locked onto him. Around her, the sentinel stood upright, its energy blades humming menacingly. Cale knew that any misstep would be fatal, but for the first time in hours, he allowed a small grin to form. This was the moment where human ingenuity, resilience, and courage would prove themselves. The Empress spoke, her voice resonating across the battlefield, clear and commanding. "Human, you have fought well beyond expectation, but all resistance ends. Submit, and I may allow your species to survive under my rule." Cale's laugh was bitter, shaking with exhaustion but filled with defiance. "Humans do not submit, not to numbers, not to machines, not to empires, not now, not ever." With that, she struck. A wave of energy shot from her palms, slicing across the battlefield. Cale dove to the side, the blast tearing a trench through the sand where he had been standing moments ago. The sentinel surged forward, charging with terrifying speed. Alien soldiers advanced behind it, but their confidence had faltered. Cale had changed the psychology of the battle. They were no longer simply attacking. They were hesitating, watching, calculating. Cale knew he could not face the Empress in a direct fight. Her power was absolute, and his weapons were only marginally effective. He needed the environment, the terrain, and every ounce of creativity left in him. He sprinted toward a canyon, his body screaming in protest, knowing that the narrow path would neutralize some of her army's advantage. The Empress followed, floating above the sands, energy crackling around her. "Do you think the terrain can save you?" she asked, her tone sharp but intrigued. "You are alone, you cannot win," Cale smirked. "Alone, maybe, but I fight for more than myself. That is why humans endure." He reached the canyon just as the sentinel entered, its massive form barely able to fit between the walls. Cale activated his traps, explosives he had meticulously placed days ago, rocks rigged to collapse, and hidden plasma charges. As the sentinel advanced, Cale triggered the charges. The walls erupted. Rocks tumbled down, striking the massive machine and forcing it sideways. Sparks flew as it tried to regain balance, and Cale used the moment to fire at its joints, overloading its internal systems. The creature faltered and stumbled. The Empress's eyes narrowed. She had expected the human to survive, perhaps even evade, but not to turn the battlefield itself into a weapon against her greatest creation. She floated down, closer now, her golden armor reflecting the glow of the fires. "Clever," she said softly, almost like an admiring whisper. "But cleverness alone will not save you." Cale knew she was right. Cleverness alone would not win this battle. He had to force a final confrontation, not with raw firepower, but with strategy that even she could not anticipate. He scanned the canyon quickly, calculating angles, exits, and vulnerabilities. He grabbed a bundle of makeshift plasma charges and tied them to a fallen sentinel piece, rigging it to act as a massive pendulum. When she advanced, Cale triggered the trap. The massive piece of machinery swung across the canyon, striking the Empress's forces and creating a barrier of confusion. Soldiers were thrown aside, their advance stalled. The sentinel, destabilized, toppled forward, sparks flying from exposed joints. Cale leapt forward, firing a series of rapid shots at weak points in its armor. The creature groaned, staggering, and finally collapsed, unable to continue. The Empress did not retreat. She stepped forward, eyes blazing. "Impressive, truly impressive, but you are only one human. Your defiance will end." Cale's pulse rifle was nearly empty, his grenades all spent. There was no conventional victory left. He relied on what humans had always relied on: adaptability, courage, and the ability to turn a desperate situation into an advantage. He spotted a canyon fissure above the Empress. It was unstable, jagged, and dangerous, but it could work. He lured her forward with feints, dodges, and calculated retreats, keeping just out of reach, guiding her into position. The Empress, confident in her power, followed. Cale triggered the final trap. Rocks and debris collapsed from above, tumbling down with thunderous force. The Empress barely avoided the crushing rocks, using her energy shields to deflect part of the onslaught. Sparks flew, and her golden armor was scorched in places. Kale seized the moment to roll forward, firing at exposed points in the Empress's armor with his last energy cells. The shots did minor damage, but more importantly, they distracted her. Kale darted across the sand, positioning himself strategically as the Empress recovered. He was a blur, moving unpredictably, a living embodiment of human adaptability. The Empress lunged at him, energy flaring from her palms, but Kale used a sudden feint, rolling behind a rock just as her strike smashed into it. The rock shattered, sending shards flying, and Kale launched a well-aimed pulse charge from his rifle. The blast struck a nearby canyon wall, collapsing it further and forcing the Empress back. The battlefield was silent for a heartbeat, the only sound the wind and distant fires. Kale stood exhausted and battered, his chest heaving, arms trembling. The Empress hovered before him, breathing lightly but with no sign of retreat. Her eyes, golden and piercing, met his. You are unlike anything I have seen," she said, her tone softer now, almost reverent. "A single human has challenged me and my entire army. I underestimated your species. I see now that humans are extraordinary." Kale's lips curled into a grim smile. "It's not luck. It's what we do. We endure, we fight, we survive, and sometimes we astonish even the strongest." The alien soldiers who had watched the entire encounter lowered their weapons, stunned. Their Empress was still a figure of unmatched power, yet even she had been forced to respect the ingenuity and courage of a single human. Murmurs spread across the ranks. Some could not comprehend what they had witnessed. A lone human had not only survived, they had outmaneuvered, outsmarted, and challenged an entire army and its ruler. The Empress floated closer, tilting her head. "You have taught me something important. Perhaps the universe underestimates humans too often. You embody what my armies fail to see: intelligence, unpredictability, courage. They are your greatest weapons." Kale nodded, feeling the weight of exhaustion, triumph, and disbelief. He had survived the impossible. The Sentinel lay disabled, her army had been forced to pause, and even the Empress had acknowledged the human spirit. "You've seen what humans can do," Kale said quietly. "Remember it." For a moment, the battlefield was calm, almost peaceful in the glow of firelight. The Empress studied him, her expression unreadable but her eyes betraying a newfound respect. Finally, she withdrew, floating back toward her flagship. Her army followed, cautious, their perception of humans forever altered. Kale sank to the ground, the heat of the desert replaced by the cold bite of fatigue. His body ached, his armor was in tatters, but his spirit soared. He had faced the impossible, and he had prevailed, not through sheer strength, but through ingenuity, courage, and the relentless human will to survive. Above him, the stars twinkled like witnesses to his defiance. Kale looked toward the horizon, imagining the humans still scattered across distant planets, perhaps watching, perhaps inspired. He had shown that no matter the odds, no matter the enemy, humanity was not a species to be underestimated. The Empress's flagship disappeared into the night sky, taking her army with it. The desert was quiet once more. Fires burned low, smoke rose in thin spirals, and Kale remained standing. Alone, yes, but victorious. He had changed the outcome not just of a battle, but of perception itself. A smile crossed his face, faint but genuine. The impossible had been done. A human had faced the might of an alien empire, confronted their supreme ruler, and survived. The galaxy would not forget this night. The stories would spread, the legends would grow, and humanity's reputation would be forever altered. Kale rested for a moment, letting the silence wash over him. He had fought, survived, and proven what one human could accomplish against overwhelming odds. He was bruised, battered, and exhausted, but unbroken. The universe had watched, the Empress had watched, and the entire Zythurian army had witnessed it. A single human had defied them all. And in that defiance, Kale felt the enduring truth of his species. Humans were not merely survivors. Humans were fighters. Humans were unpredictable, resilient, and extraordinary, and sometimes one of them could change the course of history alone. The desert night stretched on, quiet but alive. Kale remained vigilant, knowing this was only one battle in a larger war. But for now, he had done the impossible. The galaxy had seen the power of a single human. The Empress and her army had been stunned, and humanity had earned a new place in their minds, a force not to be ignored. Kale finally allowed himself to sit, exhausted, watching the fires of battle slowly fade into darkness. Alone, yes, but victorious and unbroken.